It is important for us to do symbolic things. It is important for us to make these gestures. And when I talk to elders, they tell me that actually hearing me say the names of the nations at the beginning of every public gathering is actually deeply meaningful for them because their whole lives, they never felt like they belonged here. They never felt like they were ever acknowledged. And so in this case, I was always cognizant of the fact that I sit under a banner that talks about Calgary's foundation as a town in 1884, Calgary's foundation as a city 125 years ago in 1894, and that we have these flags that represent our first responders, that represent the military units and their history with the city of which we're so proud. But there's nothing in that chamber where we make our decisions every day that reminds us that people were here a lot before 1884. And so I thought this was a really, really nice gesture for us to be able to have those flags in the chamber simply to remind us that people have been building community here a lot before there was a city council.
On the retirement allowance, which probably won't come till tomorrow.
Probably not till tomorrow.
What are your thoughts now? There seem to be now 3 proposals. 2 are in the report and 1 is not. One is to grandfather it. The second is to end it at the end of 2020, in 2 years. And I think there'll be a councillor or 2 that will push to end it like at the end of January of next year. In other words, in a month and a half. Where do you sort of feel things are going to settle, or where do you?
Well, I don't know. I would never ever predict where things are going to settle.
Where would you like it to settle?
The ending at end of 21 makes sense. We certainly have a lot of opinions that show that if we tried to end it early just to make a statement, it would end up costing us more than just waiting until 21 because you have to give people proper notice. When you've had something that's been in place for over 50 years, you don't want to open yourself up to grievances, to legal action in a unionized environment. And certainly, I don't want to say that exactly what the legal advice we've had from third parties say, but I think it's pretty commonsensical to say you don't want a symbol of cost cutting to cost you more than the cost you cut.
Well, what do you think of the fact that this story has sort of, they didn't know when it was going to be, and then they told you it was the mid-1980s, and then they finally found a piece of paper saying it was 1981, but actually it was 1964, and it might not be, and until we find Mr. Ferguson.
Have you found him?
No, not yet. We're looking for him, see if he's still around. It might not even be 1964. We really don't know that. And we didn't even know about it until the CTF brought it up a year and a half ago.
Well, it's been in the annual report every year.
Since 2011,
And so we did know about it. But certainly, I have to admit that I didn't read every single note to the annual report, or I may have asked questions about it much earlier. It's what is it exactly? It's your vacation allowance paid out one more time in your last year. So we've heard the number $10,000 thrown about. That's for pretty highly paid people. It's not that much for most people. That said, when we learned about it, council said, yeah, let's get rid of this. I think it was unanimous, or at least it was close to unanimous. We just have to do so, I think, in a thoughtful way. And yes, I'm irritated that I don't know when it started, but does it really matter? It doesn't matter if it was 1964 or 1961 or 1981. The point is that in these economic times, we think that it's not a particularly useful retention tool. Administration's own report says it has not been a particularly useful retention tool. So I'm not one who sticks with doing something just because we've always done it. We should do stuff that makes sense. So I'm happy to get rid of it as long as we get rid of it in a thoughtful manner.
Mayor, given the change in provincial law, is there a point in the city continuing with its own census?
I only knew about that change in provincial law today, I have to admit. We'll have to think hard about that. The census is used for many, many purposes in the city, including our own planning purposes. When we do these land use changes, it's actually important for us to know what the population in the neighborhood is now and whether it's been going up or going down. And the city census allows us to get to that level of specificity, which the federal census, which is only every 5 years, really does not. Now, it used to be that the cost-benefit analysis of the census was real easy, because if the city was growing, the amount of money we would make in additional population-based grants would more than make up for the cost of doing the census every year. Now that may no longer be the case, we'll have to do a different kind of cost-benefit analysis and determine what cadence of census makes sense for us.
How concerned are you about the lag time in terms of capital grants that you
Oh, it's very troubling. It's very troubling.
What's that worth? Is it tens of millions of dollars a year?
I couldn't tell you that today. But I do hope that we come back for a more fulsome discussion on this in the new year.
Mayor, do you share any of your colleagues' concerns about what the changes introduced under the New Democrats are going to mean for the next municipal election? As we see
there's
a
two.
little more PAC and third-party activity at this stage than we might normally see.
There are two problems which I highlighted at the time that the legislation came in, which continue to be problems. Number one was they didn't actually put limits on spending of third parties. They said they would in regulation, but they never got around to it. It's actually important to do that now because as you've seen actual partisan advertising asking for donations come up just in the last few days, which to me is pretty offside. And we need to figure out a way to comply with both the letter and the spirit of the law. Number two is there's a problem with the way the donations are calculated because it's a maximum donation per donor, not per candidate. And that just could lead to all kinds of trouble. So, if Jeremy Farkas gives me $4,000, but he also gave Don Iveson $4,000, how would I ever know? And, it puts me in a position where I have to give him back the money when I find out. But I may never find out. And that means that the donor is at risk and the candidate is at risk. So that has to be cleaned up, and I'm hopeful that the new provincial government will do that.
Are you expecting that? Are you expecting consultations from you?
No.
You haven't heard anything about
I haven't heard a word about it. I read in the media today that Municipal Affairs is thinking of consulting. Well, they're probably the expert on this who spent way too much of his life, like the last 15 years on this, is me. So I would be very happy to provide input on this. I really believe that elections have to be fair and we have to get big money out of them. And we need to figure out a way that the best candidate can win, not the candidate who represents the most moneyed interests. And so I'm hopeful we'll get that right. I have not received one word of communication on what we think the problems with the current legislation are.
Last week we got more details on the New Year's Eve celebrations. Any disappointment on the limited programming this year?
Yeah. I think that when we have these endless debates about nice to have versus must have, we got to actually realize that a free downtown event that lets kids come in a family friendly way downtown to celebrate is a good thing. Last year, my nieces, who were 15 and 10 at the time, came down with me, and I was absolutely comfortable leaving them here in City Hall to go out to the food trucks, get a bite to eat, and go through the various stations, the various games and toys, while I quickly went and did some mayoral duties that were boring for them. And the fact that we can create a community where kids feel safe, where parents feel like they can bring their children down, that's actually a must-have in our community. And so I'm really sad about this particular cut. Look, it's going to be fun anyway. We're going to have the children's dance party in the library like we did last year, only it'll be during the day. So we will do, an Australia timed New Year's countdown in the middle of the afternoon instead of a Halifax one that we've done in the past. And certainly folks who want to come out will have the opportunity to skate on Olympic Plaza. And of course there will be fireworks at midnight. But that whole really vibrant, exciting, family-focused fun that we had last year and in previous years, you're not going to see this year.
And what does it mean for the future of other free city events?
Well, we also made a significant cut to Canada Day in the budget last time. I'm looking for additional funding to cover off Canada Day. I don't mind if Canada Day becomes a showcase for local artists rather than national artists, but Canada Day for me is a day that starts at 7:30 in the morning with a breakfast for seniors and ends when I push the button for the fireworks close to midnight. And there are tens of thousands of Calgarians out there. And I think Calgarians will say, something? This is actually something I expect from my community. This is something I want. And so we're going to have to figure that out.
Sir, just a quick comment on tomorrow Green Line Committee meeting. Getting a look at the options, the significance of that.
I don't think any decisions are going to be made tomorrow at the Green Line, so I'm sorry to ruin expectations.
Well, you've already seen them, right?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
But I think that it will be a good opportunity for us to see some of the very good work that's been going on to try and solve some of the engineering as well as some of the cost problems in the current alignment. And so I suspect all that will happen tomorrow is we'll get a sense of what's being done and maybe have a chance to give a little bit of direction on which alignment they should do more work on. But I really doubt that there'll be any decisions made tomorrow.
Do you see one or two that show potential, or are you concerned, oh my goodness, we got a bigger problem than we thought?
Both.
Is the downtown conundrum still an issue?
That is the issue. There are some very interesting, very creative ways to move forward on that. I think in order to move forward, we've got to let go of some of our biases in terms of what needs to be there. And as I've suggested many, many times since the very beginning of this project, I'm really interested in looking at something that also includes better transit for people in the north as well as in the south.
What do you think of Premier Kenny's continued comments about the Green Line and his criticism of the city's handling of files so far?
I actually haven't heard what he said.
Well, not
lately.
in the last couple of days, but
No,
over
he hasn't
the
said
last...
anything in months. I think since we gave him a good briefing on it,
Oh, okay.
he's been pretty quiet about it. And certainly we keep the minister and the premier well engaged in the conversations that we're having. Unfortunately, when they were in opposition, they were not deeply engaged. And I think now that they are, they understand exactly where we're at.